This lesson is going to cover what we call the false dilemma. So this is another fallacy here. And we're going to work on the false dilemma. Now, a false dilemma is pretty basic, right? Um, it's when I wrongly make it look like there are only two choices. A dilemma is a two-choice situation. And a false dilemma is when I falsely act as though there are only two choices. Now, a false dilemma is oftentimes also referred to as either a black-white fallacy, so you might call it the black-white fallacy, the either-or fallacy, the all-or-nothing fallacy, or sometimes more descriptively, the ignoring other alternatives fallacy. This fallacy happens when someone tries to establish a conclusion by offering it as the only alternative to something we find unacceptable, unattainable, or implausible. So here's an example. Either we allow oil companies to drill for oil in the Gulf, or let me try this again. Either we allow the oil companies to drill for oil in the Gulf, or we will be at the mercy of OPEC. Therefore, we shouldn't prevent the oil companies from drilling in the oil for Gulf. In the Gulf. There we go. This is a false dilemma. Why? Well, because they're presenting it as though there are only two choices. One, that we allow the companies to drill for oil in the Gulf, and the other, that we're at the total mercy of OPEC. Now, this is a false dilemma because there are other options. We don't need to necessarily drill for oil in the Gulf. And even if we don't, it's not clear that we'll be at the mercy of OPEC. In other words, there's middle ground. These are not the only two alternatives. But they're posed to us by the arguer as though they are the only two options. And since they're the only two options, and one of them is clearly absurd, we should probably, or unacceptable, or implausible, or unattainable, we should probably go ahead and allow people to drill for oil in the Gulf. Okay? So there's our false dilemma. Here's another example. Either we increase the number of troops in Iraq, or the terrorists will be attacking U.S. cities. Seems like a simple choice to me. Here again, false dilemma. The dilemma is either we increase the number of troops in Iraq, or the terrorists will be attacking U.S. cities. Those are the two choices. That is a dilemma. But it's not genuinely a dilemma because there are other alternatives. So this is a false dilemma. This is presented to us as though we only have two options. And in fact, we do not have only two options. There are many more. False dilemma. Perfectionist version of the false dilemma. There are various versions of the false dilemma. The perfectionist version really is like an all or nothing. This is where we're like, either it's perfect or forget it totally. Okay? Here's an example of that. It's impossible to eliminate terrorism entirely, so we should stop wasting money on it. Right? No. Just because we can't eliminate it entirely doesn't mean that we shouldn't spend money on it. Okay? And this poses the issue as though there's only two alternatives. Either we eliminate it completely, or we stop spending money on it altogether. Well, no. These are not the only two options. And the way we know this is a perfectionist version is either we get it perfectly right or forget it. So we should just forget it. By the way, another place that the perfectionist version of this fallacy comes up, or has come up recently in the news, has to do with the legalization of drugs in the United States. And the argument goes something like this: we will never be able to stop all the drugs coming into this country and the sale and the use of drugs in this country, so we shouldn't even try. Well, that's a perfectionist version of a false dilemma. It assumes that either we get it perfectly and completely stop drug use in the country entirely, or it's not a battle worth fighting. That's just a false dilemma. There are more options than that. So we can't quite accept that claim as true. Another version of the false dilemma is called the line drawing version of the false dilemma. The line drawing version basically says something like this. It says, you know, you can't really tell me where the line is between A and B, so there's no difference. For example, to give you a visual illustration, if I'm looking at a color wheel, You can't tell me where the red begins and where the blue and where the red ends and the blue begins. Like red and blue fade into each other. Where does it stop being red and start being blue? Since you can't draw a specific line for me, since you can't perfectly delineate that, then what am I going to say? There's no such thing as color? There's no such thing as red or blue? I mean, come on, what does that allow me to draw? What conclusion does that allow me to draw? What I'm doing is I'm asserting that because you can't draw a line, then, you know, your reasoning is flawed somehow. So let me give you a more concrete example. There shouldn't be restrictions on violence in the movies. After all, when is a movie too violent? You can't draw a line. Okay, well, maybe I can't draw a line and tell you exactly how many violent scenes in a movie make it too violent, or exactly how violent any particular scene needs to be, how much blood is seen, how much aggression, shooting, stabbing, whatever is seen. Maybe I can't tell you precisely where that line is. That doesn't mean that there's no such thing as too violent, right? And what they're saying is that because we can't draw that line, there shouldn't be any restrictions at all. Of course, you could very easily take this the other direction. Since you can't draw the line, we should restrict all of them, which is what some extremists do. This is what extremists do, right? They say, since we don't know, you can't have any. And then people who are more liberal say, since we don't know, you should be able to have it all, right? Same premise, different, exactly opposite conclusion. These are all versions of a line drawing fallacy, and again, the line drawing imagery here is that because I can't draw a clear line between the two, telling you where one ends and the other begins, that something is to be accepted or to be rejected. That's the line drawing version of the false dilemma. Okay. All right, that's it for that lesson.